What do you give the odds of these talks succeeding in any kind of near-term timeline?
I don't see any big breakthrough in the near term. I think his analysis is correct. I think to lower the expectations is smart. If you have the vice president there, that's usually when you sign the deal.
Right.
So I think they're doing this in the right way. Iran is notorious for being dilatory in its tactics. Trying to get to a deal, but then pulling the rug out at the last minute. And then when you do get a deal, it's trust but verify, and it's very hard to trust them. And I think that's the big issue.
I'm curious. We've been following this, as Eric said. Everything's changing hour by hour. I'm curious for you, as Chairman Emeritus of the Foreign Affairs Committee, are you getting the information that you need about the diplomatic objectives and how these talks are unfolding? Or are you, like us, kind of fumbling a bit here, trying to figure out who's doing what and who's running point?
I mean, it could be better. Even in the prior administration, I would get calls from the Secretary of State. I think on this
You're talking about a Democratic administration.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they've been very close to the vest on this. And I understand that. But it's also important to reach out to Congress. We're under Article 1, a separate but equal branch of government. And so I've been to Islamabad. He's right. It's a very long ways away. And it's a very different part of the world. I do applaud Pakistan, though, for stepping up and being an intermediary between the two parties. I'm not very sanguine under this regime in Iran that you're going to have anything in the short term. I applaud the president for not hitting, civilian infrastructure. That's almost an act of, war
crime, yeah.
To be honest with you. And so I think this is the right path. I know the markets have responded very well to this. I don't think it's in any best interest to see this drag on. The war drag on, if you will, when they see rising gas prices. There's a lot of pressure, actually, on the White House to get this thing resolved, but I don't know. And I think Iran knows that, too. And I always am very skeptical. I think they're always trying to play us.
But to that point, as we've talked about, the reason this administration pulled out of the Iran nuclear agreement the first time is, they said, because Iran couldn't be trusted. And even if they entered a deal, it wasn't worth the piece of paper it was written on.
Right.
Those facts on the ground have not innately changed.
No.
Are they going to be able to get a better deal this time around?
Well, the JCPOA would have legalized a nuclear bomb in Iran today. That's what we were saying back when we opposed that. Look, as long as this regime is in power, you're going to have this problem. And we've had this problem since 1979. Every president since then has said no nuclear, warhead in Iran. But no president's really done anything. They tried the JCPOA. President Trump's the first president to actually act and hit Iran where it hurts. But I do think in the early days of this, when the Ayatollah was with his cabinet underground and they were annihilated and taken out, there was a hope that there could be a regime change at that point in time. But the fact is it didn't happen. And I don't know if the American people have the appetite to stay in long term to finish that job, or whether we hand that off to Israel and let Mossad try to do that. I don't know. But as long as this regime is in power, we're going to have this problem.
Let me ask you about that, because there's a big piece in the Times about the state of the new supreme leader, grievously injured, getting a lot of medical care from a very small group of physicians. People are passing notes to get to him because they're worried about giving any indication of where he might be. But what you're talking about raises this point of who does the U.S. need to talk to if its objectives here are to get some sort of regime change or to really change Iran? Mm-hmm. Was that a colossal misstep, do you think, by this administration, killing those who could have been perhaps partners in trying to change the course in Iran?
Well, after the 12-day war, they didn't step up, and they were not willing negotiating partners. Yeah. Now they're no longer in this world, but there is a line of succession in Iran, and that's taking place. Their foreign minister seems to be the point of contact for this negotiation. But they have, they're going to continue to, as long as this regime's in power, we're going to have this problem. And so, they've been a source of torture and agony and terror in the Middle East since 1979. And until that regime is gone, it's going to be hard to have peace in the Middle East. It's going to be hard, as Jared Kushner goes there, who is the architect of the Abraham Accords, to have normalization between Saudis and the Arab world and Israel. And we were getting so close to that. That's when October 7th happened. When those talks of normalization were going on, Iran saw that, it lit up its proxies, and that's why we had October 7th.
But given David's question and the fact that, to your point, that regime did not fall. It is still there in possibly a hardened form. Is the Iran we have now potentially more dangerous and unpredictable than the Iran we had before this conflict started?
I mean, possibly. Their military industrial complex has been severely degraded, right, and that's the good news. The bad news is the regime still continues to move, forward. And I think you're going to continue to have that problem of trusting them. And it's a very fanatical. This is not Venezuela and a decapitation of Venezuela. That was a beautiful military operation. This one, far more difficult. It's a larger country. It's hard to effectuate regime change without troops on the ground, which I would not recommend. I think we put our troops in the ground there. They become magnets for the jihadists. We saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years. I don't think that would be a good idea. I do think Israel, though, with Mossad, remember, they can carry out political assassinations. Congress has made that illegal. They can do things we can't. And I think maybe they're perhaps in a better position to try to effectuate that. It's very complicated, though.
Increasingly, when we talk about Iran, we're talking about China and the degree to which China is advantaged by this war continuing. I'm curious if the president were to call you up and ask for your counsel ahead of his trip to China, what you would say. What are the objectives he should have in making that having that meeting with President Xi that's been postponed once already?
I would lay conditions. I mean, the meeting itself is a concession of any president to meet with Chairman Xi, who is perhaps our greatest adversary in the world right now, the great power competition. And I would lay conditions. First, I would say, hey, stop assisting Iran in the region. I would say the same thing to Mr. Putin. Stop providing drone technology. Stop providing targeting information on our military. I would say the same thing to Chairman Xi. I'm not going to meet and have a détente-like meeting if you're going to continue to arm Iran with your software that helps with your drone technologies. That should be an absolute precondition to any meeting.
We've only got about 30 seconds before we have to let you go, but I do want to ask you about the cabinet shuffling we're seeing and the changes in leadership in the president's inner court. Do you think this is a positive thing, or do you think this is a sign of disarray and chaos in the White House?
Well, some was due to, I think, malpractice on the part of the cabinet members. I mean, the labor secretary had some really gross violations going on. I think Christina is a colleague of mine. I respect her. But what they did with Bovino and how they handled that situation, I was a little surprised by the Attorney General, Pam Bondi's firing. There was a piece, though, that came out in Politico today. It talks about this very issue. He has a limited window on confirmations. Right. So there are a few more of these firings in the queue, as I understand it. And so the advice was, look, if you're going to do this, do it now while you have time to get confirmations done before the midterms. Otherwise, don't do it.
Who's next? Do you want to preview? You have information that we don't?
I'm not going to. Well,
save for the dinner.
You can read Politico.